Can I get started? Good morning. When the Me Too movement made waves around the world, women and men celebrated the public condemnation of sexual harassment or sexual abuse. But a nuance that many people may not have caught on about is that Me Too was not just about sexual abuse. It was mostly also about power abuse or power imbalance. So, did you know that it took Salma Hayek 10 years to make her movie Frida? Because at the time, Harvey Weinstein was, of course, the producer. And now that we know what we know about him, he had been asking her to do all sorts of things, such as being naked in front of the camera and things that she was not comfortable doing. So she kept having to delay this project that was really important to her. So coming back to the question of power imbalance, it can be fertile ground for potential abuse, or at least toxic relationships. We all have heard of toxic relationships in our personal lives. We all have a girlfriend or another friend who is not leaving that man that we can see that she should leave. Or maybe perhaps yourself, you've been in a situation that was difficult for you. But in the workplace, that can happen too, because as we know, there's oftentimes power imbalance at work. In our tiny world of interpretation, there's often striking imbalance between hirees and hirers, students and teachers, newcomers and the old guard. For example, the consultant interpreters usually hold the client relationships, and they can have their pick at who to hire, essentially. Whereas if you are trying to get hired, you have no power. And then some trainers have godlike status that can easily shatter and eager to please students' self-worth if they go in with a laundry list of critical comments on their interpreting performance. So those are a few examples of how in our world we can witness these kind of more toxic relationships. Time check. So let me give you a couple of symptoms of when you feel things are getting a little bit toxic. The first symptom is you constantly feel devalued or depleted when you interact with this person, but you're not exactly sure why. You can't really pinpoint it exactly, but you just feel drained and kind of not appreciated. You also constantly feel that you're being disrespected and that your needs are not being met. And in fact, you can't even think about your needs. You're always thinking about the other person's needs. And therefore, it's starting to have a toll on you, on your self-esteem. You could feel depressed or angry, or again, just tired after speaking to this person. And finally, you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around this person. You're trying to avoid being a target. You're kind of trying to work around it, but you can't avoid them because you have to work with them. Oh, and the last one is you're always the one to blame. So this kind of blame could be passive aggressive, but you feel that they feel that it's your fault and you've done something wrong when maybe you have not done anything wrong. So these are a couple of signs to watch out for. Now I'd like to talk about an especially insidious kind of toxic relationship, which is the one between an empath and a narcissist. So let's define them first. Let's start with a narcissist. So a narcissist is someone who usually sees themselves as better than everyone else. At the extreme, they can actually be diagnosed with a personality disorder. You know, we all have seen the typical inflated sense of ego, lack of empathy, needing to be admired. But deep down, they actually have deep-rooted insecurities and fears, which they cover up using these narcissistic traits. On the other hand, the empath is the complete opposite. They usually tend to be hyper attuned and sensitive to other people's emotions and energies, so to speak. So many interpreters, as you can imagine, are empaths, or they're hyper empaths, super empaths, because that's what we do. We put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So understanding and forgiveness is their strength, but it could also become a bit of double-edged sword where they easily let other people step over their boundaries. So an empath often has a hard time giving up on someone because they want to believe that their compassion is able to heal that person. And especially that they can heal a narcissistic individual. So you can see how the two of them together kind of creates the perfect storm for potential abuse. On the one hand, the narcissist tends to deflect blame. They don't ever blame themselves. Things happening is always other people's fault. And on the other hand, the empath tends to assign blame to themselves, and their boundaries are easily crossed. So it creates kind of a trauma bond between the two of them, potentially. So that's how it works. And I'd like to also tell you that narcissists can be difficult to spot because they're usually really good in public. They're good with people, but when you start to have a more intimate relationship with them, that's when that charming facade just falls off and you can see through them. So I think I'm just going to leave you with a couple of tips if you're ever in that situation. The first one is to assert your boundaries. So learn to say no, even if it's hard in the moment. Recognize those signs I talked about before, and when you become aware of them, then try to say no. The second one is don't let the highs get too high or the lows get too low. For example, if someone hired you and then they blame you for something you didn't do, maybe you didn't prep enough, maybe you didn't use the right word, don't let that crush you or prevent you from going to sleep. And then if they turn around and then start complimenting you how amazing your interpreting is, don't also over rejoice, because the next day it could be back to kind of crushing you. And the final advice is to leave the situation. Sometimes we may not need that extra money, or, we think we'd need that extra job, extra money, but I think your mental health is worth much more. Thank you.